Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network Team Autopsy Report. We have the North Carolina State Wolfpack on the autopsy table because this team needs a deep evaluation performed to find out what happened in 2024. If this is your first time with us, thank you for joining us, whether it's on the YouTube channel, streaming it on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, or listening on your favorite podcast platform. Let's start with the head coach, Dave Doeren, because what we're seeing from this coach kind of is getting to be a very interesting pattern. 14th year as a head coach. Spent his first 2 years at Northern Illinois, where he was ultra successful. In those 2 years, 23 wins, 4 losses, win percentage of over 85%. Since being in Raleigh for the past 12 years, his record is 87 wins, 65 losses, 572 win percentage. Folks, this team has been up and down during his entire tenure. A couple of 9-win seasons? Absolutely. A couple of 4 and 5 win seasons? Absolutely. So, Dave Doeren, we need to see either you advance this program or North Carolina State may need to look for a different solution at head coach, I should say. Let's start with the betting total. This team's season win betting total back in June was 8.5. Folks, never had a chance of getting there, as this team only won 6 games in the regular season. When we look at our composite win total based on 3 very significant criteria for each and every team that we study and evaluate. We actually had this team at a 5.8, so barely getting over that 6-win mark, but we felt like we had this team really solid from what we were seeing week in and week out. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper. When we look at your team from an overall standpoint, and this affects your final grade during the final verdict, which we'll get to, let's say, in about the next 23 minutes, as I got 24 minutes on the clock here. We're going to look at NC State's strength of schedule, 0.351, 64th out of 134 teams. Means you're not playing a lot of highly power-ranked teams there on your schedule. Then when we look at their strength of record, basically look at it this way, your opponent's winning percentage. How well did your opponents do during their year? Now you're looking at a 0.568, 44th out of 134 teams. So you're going to find when we get to their schedule here in just a moment that they played a couple of teams with some really good wins, but that strength of schedule overall is not going to be something we're going to be able to gloss over. So, Tina, will you pull that up on the screen for me? Okay, so when we talk about your strength of record, basically looking at your opponent's win-loss record, the Tennessee Volunteers ended the season 10-2, Louisiana Tech 5-7, Clemson 9-3, Northern Illinois 7-4, Wake Forest 4-8, Syracuse 9-3, Cal 6-6, Stanford 3-9, Duke 9-3, Georgia Tech 7-5, North Carolina to close out the regular season 6 wins, 6 losses. So, like I said, you're going to find some teams in there with some nine plus wins there. You're going to see a lot of teams 6-6 and below. So, kind of a mixed bag there as far as how their schedule laid out. Now, when we look at what kind of defensive opponents did this NC State team go up against last year, we used a baseline of 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams we had in college football last year. So let's look at how many of their opponents from a defensive standpoint finished inside of that 68 number. Well, the Tennessee Volunteers power ranked as the 3rd best defense in our metrics last year. Clemson, 35th. Northern Illinois, 37th. Syracuse, 67th. Cal, 45th. Cal 46th. Duke, 45th. Georgia Tech at 15. 7 of their opponents ended inside of that top 68. So if you want to look at it this way, and if you're looking at the graphic, you'll see this number posted. That I'll share this with our listeners on the podcast. On a week in and week out basis, you're looking at an NC State offense that would have gone up against the 53rd rated defense week in and week out. You're not going up against high caliber defenses if your average opponent is hovering around the 50s. That defense would have probably been on a team that was probably about 6-6 and struggling to get to that 6-win plateau. Now, let's jump to the offense here. And I'm going to give out some average numbers for the NCAA teams last year in Division I. We're going to give out NC State's number. And then when we adjust for opponents, going next level for you. So, average team scored 28 points per game last year. 227 yards passing per game, 160 yards rushing per game. So about a total offense number of 387. NC State, 29.2 points per game. When we adjust for opponents, virtually the same number, 29.3. When we look at their passing offense, 233 yards per game passing. When we adjust for opponent, that goes down about 10 yards per game, down to 223. Their rushing offense, 141 yards rushing per game. When we adjust for opponent, that gets them up to that average of 159. So an improvement of 18 yards in their total offense. 374 yards per game. When we adjust for opponents, 382. So basically right there with the NCAA average last year. Now let's move on to how did this team stack up as far as their drives ending with a score, touchdown, or field goal? How many of their drives ended with a touchdown, and how well did they do from an offensive standpoint converting on third downs? So NCAA averaged last year per team converting scoring drives about 40%. NC State was at 46.2%. So much better than the NCAA average last year. Drives ending with a touchdown, average team about 29% of their drives ended with a touchdown. NC State just slightly better at about 31%. Now, third down conversions, they're actually below the NCAA average of 39%. NC State sitting at 37.4% conversion on third downs. Average team allowed about 23.5 sacks last year for the season. NC State slightly worse than that at 25 sacks allowed last year. And this team was a turnover machine, 22 turnovers in 12 regular season games last year, not taking care of the ball there. We'll go one step further with our analytics here. We give you 3 E's that we'll always talk about. How effective was your offense? How explosive was your offense? And how efficient was your offense? When I look at our data from last year, NC State had the 68th most effective offense in college football last year. You're barely, by that number, you would be considered one of the worst Power 4 teams in that metric. Now, as far as explosive offensive number, NC State was at 63. Efficiency, 53rd. NC State was the 57th overall rated offense in our metrics last year. If I had to bullet point this offense, I would say inconsistent efficiency. Some good numbers in some areas, not so good in others. Decent on third down conversions, but giving up 25 sacks and being that bad as far as explosive plays per game, just not good enough from an offensive standpoint. So now let's take a look at the defense. What kind of caliber offenses did this defense go up against last year? Once again, we'll use that baseline of 68. Tennessee was the 26th power ranked offense for us last year. Clemson was 13th. Syracuse was 20th. Duke was 59th. Georgia Tech was 61st. North Carolina was 40th. Only 6 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. Now you're talking about an average offensive opponent being in the around 63 on a week in and week out basis. You're now looking at a team that would have probably, from an offensive standpoint, probably been about 5-7 last year. And 2 of their opponents in Louisiana Tech and Northern Illinois, 2 of their wins, both of them were outside of the top 100 if you're looking on the YouTube channel here. That's telling me that they really should have put up some really good defensive numbers. We're about to take a look to see exactly how did this defense perform during the regular season. This defense was giving up 30.5 points per game. When we adjust for opponent, ticks down about a point down to 29.3 points per game. Still a lot of points being given up considering the caliber of schedule that you went up against. Their pass defense gave up about 241 yards per game. However, when we adjust for opponent, that dips down to about 219. So almost a 22 yard per game improvement when we adjust for opponent. Going to see the inverse here as far as their rush defense. On the surface, you're going to see 143 yards per game is what they gave up in the regular season. Looks like that's about 10 yards below the NCAA average. However, When we adjust for opponent, NC State defense was giving up 161 yards per game on the ground, 18-yard per game regression there. When we add those two numbers up, you're looking at a total of 384 yards. When we adjust it, it's 380, so about a 4-yard improvement. So not a lot of swings there. Our numbers say they were actually a little bit better against the pass, not as good against the rush. That happens when you adjust those numbers the way that we do it. Now, as far as their sacks generated on defense, remember I said about 23 and a half? NC State was just a tick below that at 22. Their opponents on fourth down converted 11 out of 19 tries. That's almost 58% conversion there by your opponents. The average last year was about 53. This defense actually did a solid job of forcing turnovers last year, 18 forced turnovers. But as we saw, this defense struggled at times in key situations. Now, let's talk about the 3 E's for their defense. How effective, how explosive, and how efficient was this defense last year? Well, when we look at it, NC State had the 58th rated defense as far as effectiveness goes. They had the 87th worst defense in explosive plays allowed, so giving up big chunk plays. And as far as efficiency goes, they were 88th. This defense ended the regular season as our 77th rated defense in college football. So you play on a weak schedule and you're still getting torched on the defensive side of the ball. That is absolutely not good there for your head coach. Now, when I take a look at the special teams were decent, not exceptional. So this team converted, it looks like 75% of their field goals, 18 out of 24 for us, just a little bit below the NCAA average of 76%. Did miss one extra point, so 34 out of 35. The punting game actually really struggled, averaged less than 40 yards per punt. That puts you in the 120 percentile of the FBS last year. Now, let's take a look at Coach Dave Doran. Was he an aggressive head coach going for it on fourth down? I would say absolutely not. Out of 144 qualifying Division I coaches last year, he was 128th. And that's a little surprising considering the success that they had converting fourth downs last year. They were 8 for 13 last year. A conversion rate of almost 62%. So when you're converting at a rate like that and you are looking at the possibility of being able to extend those drives out, you need it to be just a little bit more aggressive there going for it on fourth down. Now, let's take a look at how did this team perform. You know what, before we do that, let's take a look at the quarterback position, because this may be some of the issue that this team had. Inconsistent quarterback play. CJ Bailey played in all 12 games, completed about 65%, threw for barely 2,400 yards, did have 17 touchdowns, had 10 interceptions, so turning the ball over way too much. If I look at, did they have a quality run game? Folks, this run game was one of the worst in college football. Not one running back had 100 carries last year. No running back had 600 yards rushing. That is really poor there. As far as when we look at their wide receivers, no wide receiver caught more than 55 receptions last year, and their tight end was their leading receiver as far as yardage go. He had 661 yards there. So not a lot of production from this offense. I think when we get to the next portion of the breakdown, we're going to see some offensive struggles here. So let's take a look at how did this team look in the games that they won and how did they look in the games that they lost. So in their 6 wins, averaging 35 points per game, attempting about 29 pass attempts per game for 243 yards per game passing, 8.5 yards per pass attempt, 12.2 yards per completion. Running the ball quite effectively, I would say, given the numbers that I just shouted out. 35 rushing attempts per game for about 158 yards per game rushing, 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. In their wins, this team was a little bit more run oriented, about 55% run, 45% pass. They were 40% conversion on third downs, only attempted 4 fourth downs in their wins, only committed 6 turnovers in their 6 wins. In their 6 losses, this offense was only averaging 23 points per game, attempting a few more pass attempts, not significant, but about 4 more pass attempts per game. Passing yardage goes down to 223 passing yards per game, 6.9 yards per attempt, 11.5 yards per completion. A fewer less rushing attempts, down to 29 rushing attempts per game, only 124 yards per game rushing, 4.3 yards per rushing attempt. So this team wasn't successful, wins or losses, running the ball. In those losses, this team was about 53% run, 47% pass, converting 31% on third downs, attempted 9 fourth downs, and committed 16 turnovers. So in their wins, averaging about 12 more points per game, attempted about, let's call it 3.5 fewer pass attempts per game for about 21 more yards, 1.6 yards per attempt higher in their wins, ran the ball about 6 more times per game, but for only 34 more additional yards. Now, let's take a look at the defense here. Defense, we're going to see some variance for sure. In their 6 wins, this defense was only allowing 23 points per game, allowing their opponents 235 yards per game passing on 33 attempts, 7.1 yards per attempt, 12.3 yards per completion. Their opponents were running the ball about 30 times per game for 135 yards per game, 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. And it looks like their opponents were converting third downs about 31% in their wins, and they forced 12 turnovers. In their 6 losses, 38 points per game. Same passing attempts, just a few more passing yards, only 247, so not a big variance there. 7.4 yards per pass attempt, 11.6 yards per completion. Rushing attempts, not a big variance there. 34 rushing attempts per game in those losses, 151 yards, 4.4 yards per rushing attempt. Their opponents were converting about 36% on third downs, only forced 6 total turnovers in those losses. So difference when this team lost, they were giving up about, let's call it 2 more touchdowns per game. Not a big variance as far as the passing or the rushing yards. They were only giving up 29 more yards per game from a defensive standpoint in their losses. So let's see if we can't pick up the variance here. Well, it was all about the turnovers. Their offense was turning the ball over when they lost almost 3 times per game. So they were only forcing 1 turnover per game in those losses. So you're talking about being almost a -2 per game in the turnover battle there. You're probably setting up your opponent in some really good scoring position there, and they were taking advantage of that. I gave you some of their offensive numbers. Let's see if there were any defensive standouts for this team last year. And folks, the only real bright spot on this defense last year was linebacker Sean Brown. Led the team in tackles with 96 tackles. Looks like he was tied for second with 9 tackles for loss. And looks like he was their third leading sacker with only 3 sacks. So from a production standpoint, nothing really stands out significant for their defense as far as being a building block going into the 2025 season. So let's go ahead and get to their final grade here, because I think we got an idea of where they're going to go. But before I do, let me just say, what did I think went wrong for NC State in 2025? Poor execution in close games, inconsistent defensive performance, struggled against quality opponents, way too many turnovers in their losses. Folks, the NC State Wolfpack will get a final grade of a C+ from us here at the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. Balanced offense, solid third down defense at times, strong red zone defense at times. Weaknesses, poor pass defense, offensive line struggles at times, and just an overall inconsistency from both the offense, defense, and coaching standpoint. The final verdict, NC State failed to live up to expectations due to inconsistent quarterback play and a defense that struggled against the better teams. So in our final couple of minutes here with you on NC State, what does this team need to fix in 2025? We got 3 keys for you. First key, they must develop a balanced offense attack, improving the pass efficiency and maintaining a consistent running game regardless of the opponent. Key number 2, defensive improvements. The Wolfpack defense in our 3 E's were outside of the top 75 in all 3 categories. You got to improve in that standpoint if you're going to have any aspirations of getting to the ACC championship game. And then third, talked about it, limiting the turnovers and continue to find ways to create more turnovers. Winning the turnover battle is always critical to any team's success. NC State committed 22 turnovers last year. That has got to go down significantly in 2025. If NC State can improve in these 3 key areas that I just highlighted, this team could take a step forward and possibly wind up with 7 or 8 wins in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.